name's Jennifer Reed. I'm with Charlie Barnhart and Associates, and we're here at Apex 2012. And we're on a panel that's going to tackle the question of global risk. I'm here with Peland from DEC, and Peter Tatley from Flextronics, and Michael Cox from MC Assembly. Charlie Barnhart and Associates has been covering this area. It's basically no secret that the global risk has increased over the past few years, and we've seen for our Outsourcing Navigator Council members, we're advising them that it is now likely that an OEM will see some kind of supply disruption over the next few quarters. These risks arise from various sources, and we've been outlining some of these risk factors in a series of blogs. The first group of factors centers around the relationship between the OEM and the EMS company. That relationship is somewhat dysfunctional, as evidenced by the high level of dissatisfaction that our research shows that there is on both sides of that equation. So, Peland, you're an objective third party in some ways, and so what advice do you have for the EMS and the OEM? They're both your customers, and what would you tell them to help improve the relationship?
Thank you, Jennifer. I would say that OEM companies over the years have benefited from EMS companies in a form of capacity, time to market, and the cost aspect of it. Mm-hmm. Right. I see this as an entire manufacturing ecosystem, okay, that companies, be it OEM and EMS, can coexist. And I see this at this very moment where costs have been the main driver and it's actually stretching the limits. And I see this as a non-sustainable approach for a long run. And I concur that, that we should make some change into this before it gets worse for the industry.
So how would you suggest that companies improve that relationship beyond just the productivity improvements? And what else can they do?
I think specifically because there's a need to coexist. So, while we all need to compete in the market space, nevertheless, I think it's still required to enhance the productivity. It's the only way to go forward, right? Technology, identifying new means and way to improve the products, the end products will be the ways to go.
Okay, thank you. So the second area of risk that we've identified is in the business processes themselves in the outsourcing relationships. So the external pressures to outsource more and more functions, and the pressures from Wall Street for the financial issues, and the pressures to go to more remote geographies, even when it doesn't necessarily make sense. So in your experience with the industry, what kind of experience have you had where the business processes have created some risk?
Mm-hmm. So from a business process perspective, I think there are a number of areas that can be addressed that can certainly improve the situation. Things that I run across personally in my business are customers who come to us maybe with expectations that aren't clear to us, or we haven't had the opportunity to make sure that our objectives are aligned properly. There are customers who come to us who can be immature as a company, who are not well prepared for outsourced manufacturing, and in some cases they will turn to a third party to work on the outsourced manufacturing on their behalf. And in my personal experience, sometimes that has been to the detriment, I think, of being successful in moving forward. Mm-hmm. If we have questions, we need clarification. There have been times when it's become somewhat difficult to get real concise clarity in response to questions, issues that we may have. So that's a bit of a concern. I think customers who maybe haven't been in the industry, customers who have representatives who haven't been involved in outsourced manufacturing, don't always know what our capabilities are, and they don't best know how to leverage them. And so there are a number of cases where we spend a lot of time educating our customers. Even before we get started, they come to us and in some cases they're looking for a quote, they're looking for a response, everything has to go at lightning speed, but they themselves are not ready for it. But they don't oftentimes, and they don't always accept the fact that they're not ready for it. And so to take the time to educate them, let them know what our capabilities are, how we can help them possibly on a local level, on a regional level, and then determine what's going to be the best fit overall. But from a process perspective, it's the difficulty of not having good clarity and clear, concise objectives.
Right. So that adds risk because they are, you waste time, and time is money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They may have an objective to be in a low-cost geography as quickly as possible. They're not prepared for it, they're not staffed for it, they're not resourced for it. They don't have the ability to give us the information we need to help them do that. And so sometimes we really have to kind of slow things down. At the end of the day, that will reduce their risk, but there can be costs associated with that maybe creates risk in their business model as well. And so you really have to balance what's appropriate for them and for us.
So do you find that if you push back on some of these OEMs who are trying to push you in one direction, do they listen to you? Are you getting fairly good success in educating these OEMs, or is it?
I don't know how I would measure my personal success. There are some customers who are very willing and very open, and they really want to collaborate. And those are great customers with ours, and those develop into great relationships most of the time. And it ends up being a successful program for us, and it oftentimes ends up being a successful program for our customers. When we have customers who aren't willing to collaborate, they're not willing to work in that manner, it makes for a very challenging relationship. They tend not to treat the EMS partner as a real partner. They're just simply a low-cost outsourced provider, and it doesn't bode well for the overall relationship. So makes for a very challenging discussion.
The third area of risk we're talking about is in the arena of geopolitical risk that comes from the black swan events in the industry, the Thailand flooding and that type of thing. And so, Michael, how do you help your customers prepare for those kinds of risks that are out of anyone's control?
Well, some customers ask the question, but I will say for the most part, most customers are not asking the question. But until this whole Thailand flood happened, I think it's really people have taken a lot of stock in assessing what are their risks. Because you look at companies like Western Digital that were shut down for months, and all of a sudden 32% of the world's supply of hard drives are now at risk, and you've got a supply chain that's so tightly knit that's in that area that really didn't take into effect that 2-3 levels down in that supply chain was going to be affected by that flood. You know, it had been 50 years since there was a flood, but people aren't thinking, they have short-term memories. There also was earthquakes in California. There were companies that were red tagged and they couldn't get to their inventory. And so some of the things customers need to take a look at is, are there regions where there can be some sort of catastrophic event? Force majeure you can't necessarily control, but you can try to prepare for it as much as possible. You have to think is, if my factory gets wiped out, there's not going to be a phone. So what am I going to do if there's no phone? How do I get to my documentation? Are you using a central repository such as a company like Arena, where companies can store their data, all their documentation, all their bill of materials? Is that stored in the location that people can get to, like for cloud computing and cloud storage? Or you're using companies like Iron Mountain to back up all your data on a daily basis? These are some of the things I think that companies need to take a hard look at.
Yeah, and the industry does have a short memory. It tends to work from one news cycle to the next. I think people think that the flooding in Thailand is not an issue anymore, but we know that there are still ramifications that have come up from it and continue to come up. And if there were a similar event in China, it would be 2 years before the industry would be coming back online, because we're so dependent on the components and the supply chain is basically so congregated in that area. So having some what-if scenarios that are tossed around within the industry is very helpful. But what other kinds of disaster preparedness programs do you have in your organization? Is that something you'd like to comment on, or do you work with your customers? Because the equipment is certainly the kind of the least portable part of a factory line.
Yes, we have been conscious and aware of our customers' concern too. We at this moment have a parallel manufacturing site. So we have two sites to help our customers in case any of these things that actually affect us that could potentially affect our customers. That's A. B is that in the case of our customers, if they are being affected by such factors, we are able to support them accordingly. And you rightly mentioned that the last flood in Thailand, we have been called upon to help our customers to respond and to react on this disaster's recovery.
Okay.
Yeah, on our part, we can only support them to provide the equipment so that they can then turn on in the alternate site.
Backup.
Yes.
And does Flex help customers with
We do,
disaster?
absolutely. Yep. So in terms of our storage and backup systems, we do have those in multiple locations. So we don't just have documentation within the existing factory, because in a case like Thailand, we would be caught completely flat-footed, and that would obviously be a recipe for disaster for our customers. I think from a disaster recovery perspective, as you talked about force majeure, Michael, and things like that, I mean, those are clearly out of control. There's nothing you can do about it. But to have a corporate-wide disaster control or disaster recovery plan in place for each facility with standardized equipment across the company, with standardized processes around the company, when you go into a Flextronics factory and they all pretty much look the same, they have the same feel, the same touch, everybody's dressed the same, following the same or similar manufacturing process instructions, the ability to transport a project from one location to another is extremely important and very beneficial.
You know, as long as you have access to the material, as long as you have the backup information and you have access to the material, typically you have copy exacts within EMS organizations. So whether you have a factory that's in Florida or it's in Mexico, as long as you can get the material out and you get it to the other factory, there's going to be a good chance that you're going to be up and running.
All right, well, that's very interesting. Now we're going to ask you to just give me one more thing that you'd like to say about risk.
I think a lot of times customers are not looking at their supplier as far as what their financial capabilities are. And as much as you're going to vet your customer, you need to vet your supplier. And it's a very similar vetting process. And you have to make sure that there's a fit and that both can financially support your products. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, good point.
Yep, I agree with what Michael had to say. Again, I think from my perspective, to get alignment on objectives, to make sure that it's clear from the manufacturer's perspective and from the OEM's perspective what the ultimate goal is, to understand how you're going to achieve that, what the steps are to get there and do it in a structured fashion, reduces risk to the customer's end game, which in most cases is to get a finished product manufactured out in the field, make it successful, make it sellable, and make them be successful. And our customers are only successful, or I should say, we're only successful when our customers are. If our customers aren't successful, it's certainly not a success for us.
Yeah, all right, good point. And Peland?
Well, I think cost of poor qualities are critical, and we all have to take note of that. And I think while we talk about price, it is important that we all recognize that we need to look at it in totality, and not to, in the whole process, that we affect operational decisions, and at the same token, it actually affect all of us. At the end of the day, I think we all have to be responsible, and we all have to play our part in this industry.
Yeah, I like your idea about the ecosystem. That's very true. All right, well, thank you all, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your...
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.